I'm Camila Santos, 33. I went to my brother's wedding to help the planner not to take the spotlight. 10 minutes, I told myself, carry a tray. Wipe a spill slip out. Then Ethan grabbed the mic and with a room full of roses and relatives told everyone I'd failed at life and should stay in the kitchen. I felt every eye, every whisper, and I chose silence. Because 3 hours later, in the same hotel, a different room would call my name and I would have to decide what kind of woman I was in public. This is not a revenge story, it's a boundary story. When family pride meets real work, what do? Stay with me and see. I was carrying a tray of champagne flutes when my brother found the microphone. The ballroom at the Grand View Hotel in Ashford gleamed like a jewelry box, roses and buttercream in the air, votive candles nodding along the edges of the dance floor. I had slipped on a thin catering apron because the wedding planner was short-staffed and a pair of steady hands can be the difference between calm and a mess. 10 minutes, I told myself. Help with a few trays. Wipe a spill slip out. Then Ethan cleared his throat, squared his shoulders like a coach about to give a speech, and announced to the head table that I had failed at life and should stay in the kitchen where I belonged. You would be amazed how quickly a full room can empty out of sound. The band clipped a note and then pretended they had meant to do it. The MC looked down as if the script could save him. The mother of the bride gave me a smile that bent under its own weight. Somewhere near the dessert display, a fork fell bright against china, and the ring of it seemed to travel. I set my tray on the side station, slid my palms along my apron to steady them, and untied the knot. It stuck, then gave. My phone reads 7 o'clock. 3 hours from this moment, another ballroom 1 floor up would hold a leadership reception for Meridian Industries. At 10, Dr. Evelyn Cross, chair of the board and a senior figure in Ethan's chain, would stand at a podium and introduce the new CEO. I would be the one walking to the front of that room. I did not correct the record. I did not plead my case to a crowd that had come for cake and a first dance. I breathed in, breathed out, rolled the apron, and tucked it into a linen bin. People think whispers are soft, but they have a grit to them. I heard my name chipped into smaller pieces at 2 different tables. A cousin's wife measured me with a glance that started at my shoes and ended in a shrug. Every family has its favorite story to tell about you. The easy one, the one that sits on the tongue. Tonight it was the story of the sister who left and came back with sleeves rolled up in a hotel kitchen. Ruth Bennett reached me like she always does, quiet as a Sunday morning. Her hand on my forearm said what her mouth did not ask. I tipped my head toward her and she patted my wrist approval without ceremony. That was the only blessing I needed. On the big screen by the band, a slideshow tried to tug the room back to sweetness. There was Ethan in a dusted Little League uniform. There I was, with a middle school ribbon hair pulled tight and stubborn. The crowd laughed in the right places. Someone clapped on the offbeat. I let the memories pass through me like the weather. I texted my assistant. Meet me at elevator D at 9:50. She sent back a tiny acknowledgement that bobbed on my screen. I slid the phone into my clutch and smoothed the plain navy dress I had put under the apron. I could feel powdered sugar on my sleeve where I had brushed too close to the dessert table. It made me smile to think I might be announced with a dusting of sweetness on my arm. Let it be. Let it stand as proof I had been of use. Ethan laughed at something the best man said, and the sound carried. He was handsome under chandelier light, handsome the way a man is when everyone has decided he deserves a spotlight, and he has never learned to share it. He guided the new in-laws through a receiving line, his palm firm at elbows, his voice a shade too loud. When he glanced my way again, I gave him nothing to push against, only the steadiness of a woman who has learned to let a wave hit and then go on its way. He looked confused for a breath, as if he had expected me to perform so he could be generous. I had retired from those auditions years ago. The hotel had old bones and good ones. I rested a shoulder against a column and felt the cool marble through fabric, the hum of the building like a bass note. A bridesmaid hurried by with a safety pin and a mouthful of bobby pins. The wedding planner passed me a grateful look as her headset whispered to her, I lifted a tray across the floor and handed 3 glasses to a cluster of relatives who would be less sharp with something bubbly in their hands. You can choose your role even in someone else's show. Tonight I chose to be useful until it was time to be something else entirely. Aunt Sophia from Houston hugged me quickly and smelled like gardenia and powder. She told me I looked well. She did not ask questions. Grace can be silenced with good manners. I gave some back. My eyes kept returning to the clock over the service corridor. I marked the minutes like stitches. If I had learned anything worth keeping by my age, it was this. You decide what you carry from one room to the next. You decide what you put down. I put down the apron, the urge to defend myself into a microphone, the old ache to be understood. I picked up my name, my schedule, my breath. I picked up my mother's voice, reminding me that the person who serves deserves the widest path. Near the cake, a small mishap threatened a tilt in the top tier that made the planner blanch. I steadied it with a palm while she slipped a wedge beneath the stand. It was right. She nodded. We both smiled the kind women share when a problem is fixed without ceremony, and no one will ever know. I went to wash my hands, blotted my sleeve, and watched the powdered sugar fade to a ghost. A minute later, the mother of the bride found me and asked softly if we could keep the evening peaceful. I told her we would. She exhaled and floated toward the head table, her posture taller by half an inch. Ethan crossed my path again. He slowed as if to throw one more line over his shoulder, then thought better of it. I said congratulations in a tone that lifted nothing and cut nothing. He nodded. Families are their own countries. Some borders you only learn by crossing them. Some you sketch yourself with a steady hand. I had drawn mine 3 weeks ago in a conference room, and I had no intention of smudging it in a ballroom. 7:30 now. The band found a Motown groove, and people swayed into it with relief. I stood near the vestibule and watched the light move over glass and silver. The only thing louder than the music was my sense that the next room would not change me, it would simply let me be who I had become. I pressed my fingers against the service door that led to the executive elevators and felt the thrum of the building again like a heart you could lean against. Then I stepped back into the center of the wedding I would not disrupt, lifted a tray one last time, and carried it the way my mother taught me, level and quiet and sure. The light settled into a warm gold, while I slid my tray onto the side station and motioned a young server to take over. He nodded, the plate steadied, and the line of glasses stopped trembling. I smoothed my sleeve, then ran a cloth along the walnut edge just to give my hands one more plain job. Plain jobs hold you still when the ground wants to shift. I stepped back into the flow of the cocktail hour with a smile I have used in hospital waiting rooms, in bored corridors, in kitchens that needed one more calm voice. It told the room everything was fine and made a little of it true. Guests drifted by, glances starting at my practical shoes and sliding off before they found a story worth keeping. A college friend of Ethan's let a smirk get loose, and it skimmed past me like a paper boat trying to find a current. At the rim of the high tops, Ruth Bennett rested a palm on my arm. Her touch was the sound of a screen door closing gently. She asked nothing with her mouth and everything with her eyes. I answered by patting her fingers the way she had once steadied mine when bad news arrived like a cold front. She nodded, and the nod carried a Sunday's worth of permission. That was enough fuel for the next stretch. Across the room, Ethan shaped a circle of colleagues like a man working a fundraiser. I could hear the cadence even without catching words. He was advancing toward partner. He had guided a deck that mattered. He was tending relationships the firm would be grateful for in the next quarter. Flashes snapped and reset. He has always enjoyed a camera and a ring of faces. I have learned the better use of a corridor and a list. I crossed his path once because moving in a straight line through a crowded room is sometimes the kindest route. I gave him a level nod and kept walking. He looked as if he had reached for a rope and found air. The wedding planner tugged at my sleeve, and I followed her into a small rescue. A boutonniere needed pinning a seating card, had wandered a timeline, wanted a quiet hand at its back. The air eased by degrees. I checked the time without calling attention to it. The watch mounted above the bar said 8:20. I loaned the planner 20 minutes. A few quick fixes, Napkins, flowers, a child steered to the photo booth instead of the cake, and the room settled. The kind of invisible work that keeps a celebration from tipping. I have come to respect the theology of small things done well. People moved with the tide a hotel creates. The ones headed for fresh air, the ones with chocolate on their minds, the ones who will always angle toward a band between songs. I kept my face neutral and let the room breathe. That kind of face is a shepherd when a room wants to scatter. When the planner met my eye and let me know she had enough hands, I felt the window open in front of me. At the side station, I rolled the thin apron's smooth ribbon neat and slipped it into my bag. My hair had loosened at the nape, and I pressed it back into order with the same care I give a signature. The mother of the bride passed, thanked me for helping, and moved on. Out of respect for the peace she was guarding, I did not add a single word. We traded a small smile that promised the night would hold. At 9:10, I walked the perimeter once more and found Ruth. I told her good night with a squeeze. She told me to go take care of my next thing with a look that delivered me to the door like a blessing. On the way to the back hallway, I paused and stacked my thoughts. Family in one drawer, work in another, both labeled, both closed. I pushed the service door and it swung on a well-oiled hinge. The air changed to the hotel's private weather coffee lemon polish and a hint of cold steel. The corridor angled past banquet racks and a rack of pressed linens that looked like quiet clouds. My heels clicked a steady measure. In every hotel, there is a hum that tells you the engines are doing their jobs. I listened until I could hear it under my own pulse. 10 o'clock was not a wish anymore. It had a shape, a podium, a nameplate that would not need correction. I sent my assistant a quick confirmation. She replied that she was at our mark with an extra badge and a calm smile for anyone who needed it. I shifted my bag higher on my shoulder, checked my phone, and returned it to the pocket where I keep things I do not want to fumble. There is a narrow relief in being exactly on time for your own life. For a breath, I let the night play out in my mind, not the fantasy of what anyone deserved, only the fact of what was scheduled. Dr. Evelyn Cross would speak first, a precise introduction that measured a career rather than flattering a crowd. She would say my name and the new title, and the room would do what rooms sometimes do when they adjust to a new map. That was enough imagination. I did not need to live the moment twice before it arrived. I stood there long enough to feel my heartbeat steady to the quiet machinery around me. The small red indicator above the service bank blinked and paused, blinked and paused, the rhythm of a building at work. My breath followed it without effort. I thought of the people on the other side of the wall, the ones I had guided through the last 20 minutes, by doing the kinds of little things that never make speeches. There are many kinds of power. Tonight I preferred the kind that leaves a room better than it found it. At 9:40 I left the ballroom without fanfare, letting the soft edge of the door hush the music behind me. I slipped through the service corridor toward elevator D and watched the arrow glow when I pressed the button. The cab opened, and the stainless steel sent me my own face. Calm. Prepared. A woman pointed toward the rest of the night. Seattle wore the kind of gray that makes the morning lights look thoughtful when the headhunter's email arrived. I had just fastened the pearl earrings my mother left me, a small ritual that steadied the day, and my reflection in the window looked less young than decided. 8 years in strategy consulting had trained me to turn noise into plans and conflict into steps on paper. It also taught me that composure is not absence. It is a tool, and you say so, or someone will mistake it for a gap you need them to fill. The message said Meridian Industries had been reading my work. A month earlier, I had written about customer retention, making the plain case that respect is infrastructure. Keep the promises, keep the people. It was not shiny, only true. The piece did its quiet work. One call became several. Flights and calendars followed, and the clean bite of a new suit across my shoulders reminded me that preparation has a weight. The interview circuit came in a single steady wave. First, a case on a manufacturer losing clients where the easy answer was gimmicks and the real answer was consistency. Then a partner panel that listened to how I listened. Then assessments that asked me to sort shapes and choose words that felt like home. I answered as myself, not in borrowed armor. When they asked about leadership, I said, "Order helps people breathe, and clarity is a kind of care. No one does their best work while waiting to be cut down." I met Dr. Evelyn Cross on a Thursday that smelled like rain and toner. She carried the stillness of kept promises. Meridian had grown on excellence, she said, and would only stay strong if excellence lived beside decency. No flares, no speeches. She asked about mistakes I owned and how I repaired them. I told her about believing a merger timeline I should have tested and the apology I made in person to a client who deserved better diligence. Her eyes warmed a degree. Meridian did not need a personality cult. It needed a leader willing to defend a culture where people could do honest, sustained work. I understood that request. I understood its cost. Between rounds, I flew home to Ashford because grief keeps its own calendar. The house felt taller without our mother, as if the ceiling had lifted and left our voices too loud in the space. Ethan filled rooms with charm and easy stories for the cousins. He has always done well at the front of a crowd. Praise finds him the way confetti finds a breeze. When his eyes met mine, there was a distance that had not been there before, not anger, just the practiced habit of thinking he knew my size. After dinner, I washed plates beside Ruth Bennett and let warm water say what my mouth could not manage. Sometimes the sink is the safest confessional a family has. That weekend confirmed what the interviews were already teaching. If family ever touched work, I needed to live inside the process, not mood. My mother raised us on that method without naming it policy. Put things back where you found them. Say what you mean without bruising the person you say it to. Fix what you break, and write down how you fixed it so you remember. Those are house rules, and they are also a governance model that holds when tempers rattle the hinges. The board session at Meridian was kinder and harder than I expected. They asked about hot talent that sings a team, about lucrative clients who are careless with people, about what I would do if my own life complicated the chain of command. I outlined structures that make fairness ordinary. Recusal when personal ties exist. Documentation that travels with the work, not the rumor. Escalation paths that do not depend on who has the loudest voice that week. The relief of systems that keep faith even when a room forgets itself. Respect, I said, is the only engine that runs all day without overheating. Back in Seattle, I sat with the offer in good light and touched the pearls again. I thought about the rooms I wanted to build, rooms where a junior analyst could hand over an idea without flinching, where a client could hear a hard truth without being belittled, where excellence did not excuse small cruelties. I also thought about the rooms I would need to exit without adding sound, because not every battle is worth the echo it leaves. People speak about anger like it is a fuel. It is, but it burns fast and hot and leaves you with the smoke. I did not choose the spark. I chose the thing that keeps its shape when the weather turns. Procedure is slow on purpose. It holds when the wind rises. 6 months earlier, in that thoughtful Seattle gray, I decided that if I ever had to walk through fire, I would bring water and a plan, and I would not spill either. 3 weeks before the ceremony, I landed in Ashford near dusk and asked the driver to take me straight to Meridian headquarters. No tour, no handshakes for the show. I wanted a table, 4 chairs, and the documents that keep a house in order when feelings try the door. Maya Patel was in the conference room first, sleeves to the elbow, legal pad square to the edge. Monica Alvarez came in with a folder tabbed like a well-sewn hem. In-house counsel followed with a laptop and forms whose edges felt like precedent. We skipped small talk and began. I put the relationship on the record the way a clerk reads a case. Ethan Santos, my older brother employed at Meridian. Then I asked for what would protect everyone, not just me. Full recusal written and logged. I would not evaluate, promote discipline, assign work to, or influence compensation for Ethan directly or indirectly. Those duties would sit with the COO and HR, with an alternate executive named if Maya had a conflict. Counsel read the language back, we adjusted a verb and closed the loop. We mapped the spill paths. Staffing performance reviews, client escalations, leadership offsites where decisions get made between coffee and lunch. For each, we set a route that did not require me. If a matter touched Ethan's work, it would go to HR for intake, then to Maya for decision with legal on the thread. If anyone tried to raise it with me in a hallway, a car, or at a donor dinner, I would point them to the process and note the referral in a recusal log kept by law. Monica laid out reporting channels in one clean pass. Not a suggestion box, a third-party hotline open around the clock by phone, web, and text, with non-retaliation in the first line. Every submission time stamped case numbered and tracked to closure. Documentation standards were plain. No conclusions without notes. No notes without dates. We designated one secure repository and 3 stewards of the keys. We turned to communications the peace companies too often leave to luck. Council brought a brief internal statement that named values without naming people. Respect at work is mandatory. These are the channels to use. These are the protections you can rely on. A press and social checklist followed so the firm could affirm what mattered without feeding a storyline. If asked about family ties, leaders would answer with policy, not biography. We wrote it in and moved on. Maya walked us through the calendar from now to my start date. She would handle routine approvals for Ethan. On day 1, the recusal would go live and the log would begin. We added a single contingency for true emergencies. If a contract needed immediate action to avoid breaking, the alternate reviewer would act first, and I would sign only as witness with a short note on what steps were taken and why. That clause was less about today than about the story the company would one day need to tell about how it stayed straight. I signed the recusal on heavy paper with a weighted pen. Legal stamped the time, slid a copy into a sleeve with my name, and sent the filing to the vault. A minute later, the confirmation email hit my phone. The hotline details. The Code of Conduct Addendum. Talking points for managers that emphasize values do not identify individuals' root concerns to HR. I read it twice. That is how words become a backbone. Monica proposed one more safeguard. A short training for leaders on handling the awkward moments that start as whispers and end as weapons if you are careless. She would role-play 3 scenes. An employee brings gossip. A client asks a pointed question. A relative wants a favor. The script would cycle back to the same sentence. Here is the process. Here is how it protects you. Here is how it protects us. We kept the door shut for 2 hours and opened it only when the plan had no loose threads. On the way out, I paused at the window over the lot and the campus map, small blocks in tidy rows. Families leave fingerprints. Companies do too. The difference is choice. We were choosing. I ate late at the little Italian place off Riverside, where the servers remember faces and let you sit with your thoughts. I put my phone face down and let it quietly return to my spine. What we did was not dramatic. It was discipline, the kind that keeps a ship moving when waves slap the hull. It was a promise to people who will never sit at that table, but will feel its decisions in how safe work feels. Back at the apartment, I forwarded the confirmation to a private folder, set an alert to review the log monthly with legal, and penciled the review dates on a desk calendar. Because ink and paper still steady me, I placed the pearl earrings in their dish and looked at the stretch ahead as a road with guardrails instead of a cliff. If my family ever tested those rails, I had something stronger than temper to meet them. A line drawn, stamped, countersigned, and the will to keep my feet on the right side of it. I stepped back into the ballroom as if I were returning to a porch after a summer storm. The room had steadied itself. Candles held their small, brave flames. The band kept to a safe groove that asked nothing of anyone except the willingness to sway. I could feel the hum of a party trying to be a party again. The mother of the bride found me before anyone else did. Her hands were folded at her waist in the way of a woman determined to keep grace in the room. She asked that I not draw attention, that the day stay beautiful. There was apology in her eyes, borrowed from someone else. I told her it would, that the night would hold. Her shoulders let down a fraction, and she drifted back to her table like a leaf the water had decided to carry. Natalie slipped in beside me just as a server carved another slice of cake. She looped her arm through mine and steered me toward the terrace. Outside, the air was cool enough to fix the mind. We stood where we could see the whole room through glass and not be part of it. She pressed a glass of water into my hand and asked if I needed anything stronger. I said I had what I needed: time and a plan. She said she hated the way the joke landed, that it was not a joke at all, and that people needed a minute to remember their manners. I told her I would not be much longer. On the other side of the glass, the slideshow began its steady march. Childhood haircuts, Halloween costumes, that summer with the inflatable pool when the lawn went bald in a perfect circle. People laughed because people are kind with a harmless memory in a dark room. Looking too long at an old version of yourself is like standing under a hard sun. It warms, then it burns. Inside, the MC regained his footing and invited toasts that did no harm. A cousin spoke about childhood forts and sheets turned into tents. A college roommate offered a polished story that had learned how to land. Laughter rose, fell, and stayed within its lane. The edge in the room had softened, but it had not dissolved. People can be quick to forgive when a schedule tells them to move on, but their eyes keep a ledger. I went back in with Natalie in time for the photo rush. The photographer directed small clusters toward the arch of flowers. Ethan worked the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who believes the lights are his to set. He thanked his partner. He pulled a junior colleague into a frame he might later send to a boss. When he spoke again, his voice was light, but the words were edged. He praised the courage it takes to leave home and make something of yourself, then the humility it takes to return when it turns out you had less than you thought. A gentle blade that cut clean. I did not answer with anything that would become a second wound. I let his words pass like air through a screen. Not because I could not speak, but because I had decided where my voice would carry. It would carry in a different room with different ears at a different hour. There are times to stand up and times to stand still and let the story reveal its own ending. I have learned the difference. Ruth Bennett sidled up with the efficiency of an old nurse in a busy ward. She did not ask if I was all right. She told me dinner rolls need replenishing on the left side. Purposeful hands can pull a person through a sour moment. I took 2 baskets from a distracted server and tucked them where she wanted them. I felt better for having done a small right thing. A bridesmaid stopped me to fix a clasp on her bracelet. A great aunt asked if I remembered the recipe for the peach cobbler. Our mother brought to church picnics. I remembered her hands more than the ingredients. Butter cold from the icebox. Flour sifted like snowfall. The way she tapped the pan and listened for it. The hall outside the ballroom was lined with more photos than the slideshow held. Vacation shots with bad hats. A school play where Ethan wore a cardboard crown and I tried not to fall off a painted castle. I paused at a picture of our mother in a summer dress with her head tipped back, caught in a laugh. The frame had a small crack covered with a gold sticker shaped like a ring. It was not meant to be symbolic. It was. I checked the time without pulling attention. 9:37. I told Natalie I would make one more loop through the room and then step out. She squeezed my hand and said she would cover for me if anyone asked. We made a final circuit that looked like nothing more than a pair of sisters taking a quiet walk past the dessert table. The staff had righted the top tier of the cake and hidden the wedge that saved it. Small mercies hold a night together. The mother of the bride thanked me near the gift table. She said the evening felt back on track. I told her that was the goal. She touched my forearm, love for her daughter clear in the gesture. I had no interest in writing my face into their photographs. A small circle of Ethan's friends drifted past, soft laughter on their collars. One watched me longer, weighing whether I would rise to an insult or let it die. I chose the second. He turned back to his drink. The evening kept moving toward what it promised: the first dance, the bouquet, the last song where people remember how to be tender in public. I stood near the vestibule and let the music run through me like a low tide. The plan clicked forward without effort. No heroics. only the satisfaction of a hard hour done clean. I smoothed my hair, checked the strap of my bag, and felt for the small outline of my phone. At 9:48, I told Natalie I was stepping out. She hugged me in the quick way people hug when time is short. Ruth lifted her chin from across the room in a signal that said, "Go on, I have the rest of this." The mother of the bride nodded once. I moved into the service corridor. It smelled like coffee and the work of keeping a hotel upright. The carpet quieted my heels. I passed racks of pressed linens the color of clouds and turned where the hallway met the service bank. A red indicator blinked its patient rhythm. I pressed the call button and watched for the arrow. At 9:50, I left the wedding floor and stepped into elevator D. My heartbeat kept to the schedule I had set. Calm, on time. I turned toward the next room where I would say nothing about the hour I had just lived and everything about the way I intended to lead. The elevator opened to a quieter floor carpet, deep enough to hush a heel. My assistant waited by the service bank with a spare badge and the kind of calm that keeps a hallway from wobbling. She clipped the badge to my dress, checked the time, and nodded toward the smaller ballroom that Meridian had reserved. 10 o'clock was not theory anymore. It was a door with my name behind it. The room carried a different kind of light than the wedding below. Cooler, steadier, the color of glass and intention. High boys along the perimeter. A podium set clean against a Meridian banner. Name cards folded like small tents on a registration table. People in suits stood in little triangles, voices low hands around sparkling water instead of flutes. The air smelled of citrus and brass polish. I lifted my sleeve and caught the faintest trace of sugar. It made me smile. I liked the reminder that usefulness is not a stain. Evelyn Cross stood near the front, speaking with the board secretary and a client I recognized from an industry panel years ago. Evelyn had the stillness of a person who knows precisely when a program should begin. At 9:59, she stepped to the podium and the room arranged itself around her the way a tide meets a shoreline. She welcomed our guests. She sketched a brief arc from Meridian's founding to the present. She named the way excellence has to live beside decency if it wants to last. She said the firm was turning a page without tearing the book. My name followed in a steady voice. The new Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Industries, Camila Santos. Applause rose like a good choir together and on pitch, then settled into a hush that was not empty. I walked forward with my hands easy at my sides and my spine remembering every small discipline that had brought me to that carpet edge. For a breath, I took in the faces, partners, clients, staffers, who do the work that keeps all other work upright. In the back row, a familiar profile caught my eye. Ethan, taller than most of the people around him, face pale under the conference room light. He looked away, then back. I gave him nothing to climb and nothing to push. I thanked the board and the people who had built the ground I was stepping on. I kept my remarks short on purpose. I said that order helps people breathe, and that respect is not a sentiment here, it is a standard. I said collaboration is not a word we put on a wall, it is a practice we measure. I said our best work will not require anyone to pay for it with their dignity. I named the next quarter's focus areas as landmarks. Client retention rooted in listening. Talent development without shortcuts. Clear lanes for escalation that do not depend on who is nearest to power. The room held the silence the way a good room does when it is adjusting to a map that makes sense. Evelyn's eyes met mine at the podium edge. Approval, not theatrics. She placed a hand at my elbow as I stepped down and introduced me one by one to the board members who had not been able to attend the final round. There were handshakes that meant it, and a few that needed practice. A senior partner from Boston told me he was eager for steady hands in a season that had too much wind. A client from healthcare thanked me for naming decency plainly. I answered in brief sentences that did not try to sell anything. The facts were doing their own work. I stood with Maya Patel and Monica Alvarez for a minute near the registration table where the pens lined up in 4 perfect rows. I told them quietly and without ceremony, that the recusal we had written 3 weeks earlier was now active and that I would not attend any meeting that touched Ethan's name. Monica showed me her phone screen. The legal log was live, the template entries ready. Maya had already rerouted 2 routine approvals. We were keeping promises in the small ways that became the big ways. Across the room, I felt the eyes of people who had heard something on a lower floor and were trying to square it with what they were seeing here. I offered them nothing to feed and nothing to fear. Presence is its own answer. I spoke with a junior analyst who looked stunned to be standing within reach of the podium. I asked her what work she was proudest of this quarter. She told me about a dashboard she had simplified, so a client finally used it. I told her that is the kind of change that lasts. When I glanced up again, Ethan had moved closer to the doorway, half inside the room and half out, as if indecision had a posture. Our eyes met once more. There was a flicker of calculation, then something that looked like the first quiet note of understanding. Not agreement, understanding. The roles were set, and the boundaries were not a threat, so much as a relief if he chose to see them that way. I turned back to a board member from finance who was asking about the client pipeline in the Midwest. I outlined what I knew and what I would know by Monday. A tray of coffee appeared, the way good service always does on time and without demands. I took a cup, let the heat settle in my hands, and counted the things we had done exactly as planned. The program began at the precise minute. The message stayed on the rails. No one mentioned anything from downstairs. That story would live or die on its own and not on our microphones. I texted Monica from the corner near the banner, confirming recusal as agreed. I will not attend any meeting concerning Ethan. She responded with a simple acknowledgement and a calendar invite for our first policy review the following week. I thanked her and slipped the phone back into my bag. My assistant, attentive to the rhythms of rooms, caught my eye from across the floor and lifted a brow in the direction of the exit. Networking was about to bloom into its usual thicket of small talk. I had no reason to linger. The facts would carry their own weight. As I left, Evelyn stepped beside me for 3 steps. She said I had set the tone and that the tone would hold. I told her we would keep to the work. We parted with a small nod. The corridor felt cooler after the warmth of conversation. I glanced once toward the elevator that would take me back to a hotel where the last song was probably playing below, people swaying a night stitching itself closed. In my sleeve, a faint sweetness still clung. I would not brush it off until morning. Morning arrived with the kind of brightness that makes a hotel room look honest. I brewed coffee, checked the schedule I had written in my own hand, and set my phone face down until 9. At 9, I turned it over, and the first thing I saw was a 12-second clip, grainy, but clear enough, looping the kitchen remark like a skipping record. It had found its way to TikTok, and then into the quick current of Reels. The captions multiplied in the usual tones: outrage, humor, advice. I let the screen go dark and opened my planner instead. A plan steadies a day when noise tries for the wheel. By 9:10, I was in a conference room at headquarters with Maya Patel on one side and Monica Alvarez on the other. Communications joined by video, legal, by speakerphone. We did not dramatize the moment. We did what we had said we would do. Monica summarized the landscape in a single clean pass. A clip in circulation, social buzz, trending on a few hashtags, a handful of emails to the general inbox, asking about our stance on respect at work. Maya took it from there with the rhythm that keeps a team from sprinting in circles. She wanted a short values-forward note for employees, a reminder of reporting channels, and a firm rule against naming individuals or family events. Legal listened and asked for the draft by the half hour. Comms had version 1 on the screen by 9:45. It began with our foundation. Respect is mandatory. It linked to the hotline page, phone, web, and text, and restated non-retaliation in the first line. It named the code of conduct without naming any person, any party, or any rumor. Legal cleared the language with 2 edits, a verb softened for precision, a clause added to protect confidentiality. Maya approved the final at 10:15 and scheduled it for the intranet and the all-staff list at 11. I asked for a narrow companion note from me as CEO. No flourish, no story. Just the spine. Respect is our foundation. Concerns and incidents belong in official channels where they can be handled with care and record. We owe each other that steadiness. Comms tightened the lines without sanding off the truth and placed it in the queue after the policy note, so it would sit inside the frame the company had already set. LinkedIn swelled while we worked. Posts about workplace dignity sprouted in the feeds of people who follow anyone in our sector. Some were earnest, some performative, most a mix. I did not add a single word to that chorus. It is tempting to narrate a moment so no one else will do it for you. It is also a way to make noise when what you owe is structure. I kept to my lane. Everything we released would go through the process. At 11, the internal note went live. It carried the firm's voice calm and exact. The reporting links worked. The case numbers generated in the system like they should. My companion's email followed 3 minutes later. It said what it needed to say and stopped where it should. I watched the red receipts tick upward and put the phone down again. I have learned to trust that a good message does not need to be watched to take root. The outside attention kept rising as it will when a story fits into a larger conversation people are ready to have. Our media inbox collected a few inquiries with subject lines that try to summon urgency. Comms used the prepared checklist. Affirm values. Decline to discuss individuals or private events. Direct to our public policies. No freelancing, no color commentary, no appetite for more heat than light. Legal reviewed every sentence before it left our door. There is a quiet relief in boring discipline. Just after noon, a major client wrote to me directly. She leads a healthcare system and has weathered her own share of storms. She said she appreciated the tone and the prompt reminder of channels. She said steadiness is a comfort when a feed wants to make a bonfire. I thanked her briefly and without adverbs, and told her we would keep to the work. Then I sent a note to her account team to let them know their client had expressed confidence and that I had heard it. Inside the company, the note did what it was designed to do. A few managers forwarded it to their teams with the right kind of endorsement. HR logged 2 concerns that were not about last night at all, but had been waiting for a moment when the path felt safe. That is how these things move. You open a door for one reason, and it allows other truths to walk through on their own legs. Monica's team triaged both with the respect they are paid to carry. People sent me private messages with kindness and questions. I did not answer them in the thread where sympathy can become a spectacle. I replied with a simple pointer to the hotline and to HR for any work-related matters, and I thanked them for caring in the compact way that does not invite a back and forth. If someone pressed, I repeated the sentence that keeps a leader from becoming the story. Here is the process. Here is how it protects you. Here is how it protects us. Maya and I closed the loop at 3 with a short check-in. She confirmed the log entries, the absence of any operational disruption, and the plan to monitor the conversation without feeding it. We agreed to keep the company's voice in one register measured and useful, and to let the platforms have their hour without borrowing it for ourselves. The work that matters would be waiting the next morning. A budget review. A client visited. A set of interviews for an open analyst role where a young person would show us what real promise looks like. I walked out into a late afternoon that had the clean feel of a day that did not go off the rails. My phone still held the clip and 100 opinions about it. I did not press play again. Instead, I went home, set the phone on the kitchen counter like a loud guest who had finally grown tired and made a simple dinner. Salt, heat, something green. I breathed and let the company carry its own weight. The way a well-built house carries a storm not by arguing with it, but by being what it is supposed to be. I began the morning with a list and black coffee, then walked into headquarters before most of the building had settled its shoulders. The lobby plants were still being watered. Security greeted me with the same plain courtesy they give everyone whose badge turns the light green. My calendar held one block in bold: HR protocol initiation. I had asked Monica to keep it simple and standard. She had answered in the way I trust most. Understood. Monica met me outside a small conference room with frosted glass. Legal was already on the line. Maya stood by the window, her tablet open to the recusal log. We took our seats and set the frame in the first 5 minutes. I confirmed again that I would not see evidence, would not direct an outcome, and would not sit in any meeting where specifics about Ethan were discussed. Maya would hold the decision lane. Legal would hold the guardrails. Monica would drive the process. My role would be limited to approving the use of our established tools at a policy level. After that, I would step out. Monica opened the case in the HR system and read the new number aloud so the record would catch it. She logged the time, the team, and the scope. Potential workplace behavior concerns related to an employee to be handled through standard channels without reference to family or private events. Legal reviewed the disclosure and said the language held. I listened long enough to see the system settle into motion, and then excused myself so they could work free of my shadow. I took the long way to my office around the back corridor, where the break room smells like fresh grounds. Through the glass, I could see people arriving in the way Mondays arrive after a long week. Coats off, laptops open, a quick check of the headlines, and then into the first task. I reminded myself that my job today was not to be a sister or a spectator. It was to keep the house upright while the people trained to sort facts did their work in the rooms designed for it. Monica's team began with the clean work that feels boring and is not. They posted the anonymous feedback link again on the intranet and reminded employees that they could use phone web or text. They reviewed calendar invites and meeting notes within policy. They looked at presentation decks to see whose name sat on the title slide and whose work lived in the body. Every move was logged. Legal sat in on interviews to ensure confidentiality was not a word but a practice. I saw none of it. I saw only the top of the funnel and the timestamps as they appeared in the executive summary Maya shared at 2-hour intervals. By late morning, Monica let me know that initial outreach had surfaced a few threads worth pulling. A project manager who had been interrupted and talked over in 2 separate client meetings. An analyst who had presented a section that later appeared under someone else's name in a recap deck. A team lead who felt a pattern of credit drifting toward the nearest microphone. The notes were careful. No conclusions. No dramatic language. Facts and time and place. I thanked her and reminded her that I would not attend any session. She answered that she knew and that the process would keep to the path we had laid out. The afternoon belonged to interviews. People came to HR one at a time and left with their shoulders a little lower, the way people sometimes do when they have been heard and their words have landed on paper that matters. Monica kept legal in the room for each conversation and followed the same script every time. What you share is confidential within the investigative team. There will be no retaliation for participating. If you experience any change in your work life that concerns you, here is exactly how you report it. They documented each detail, the same way you document carefully in a chart. You know someone else will need to read later. At 4, Maya asked for 15 minutes on my calendar for a high-level update. I closed my door and listened while she summarized the preliminary findings. There was not enough to justify severe discipline. There was enough to show a pattern that we do not ignore. Frequent interruptions. A habit of stepping in during presentations to summarize ideas in a way that erased the original speaker. 2 instances where credit attribution on slides did not match the work trail. The remedy would not be punitive. It would be corrective and supervised. Monica proposed a 90-day development plan. Complete a 6-hour Respect at Work. Training with a follow-up module on inclusive meetings. Step back temporarily from 2 sensitive client accounts during the 90 days to reduce risk while new habits take hold. Work with an assigned mentor outside the direct chain of command, a senior leader whose job would be to observe meetings and offer immediate feedback. Undergo a 360 feedback process at the end of the period, with inputs from peers, direct reports, and cross-functional partners. Check-ins at 30, 60, and 90 days, each documented. An appeal right attached to the plan itself, so that the employee could contest components without fear. I approved the use of those tools as a matter of policy and wrote the word recused in my own notes so my spine would remember the boundary. Maya signed the plan as the accountable executive. Legal blessed the structure and the timeline. Monica prepared the formal letter with the case number at the top and the right section in plain language at the bottom. No jargon, no traps. Clear expectations and a path through. I went for a short walk around the floor while Monica scheduled the delivery. When I came back, a courier envelope waited outside my office door with an HR stamp and no name visible. HR believes in small dignities. Inside, Monica had left a separate copy of the plan without names redacted for me as CEO, so I could see the framework and not the person. I read it once, and then I put it into the locked drawer I keep for documents that should not travel. Monica met with Ethan near the end of the day. I did not see him in the hallway, and I did not look for him. She delivered the plan in a neutral tone and gave him time to read. He acknowledged receipt and the options available to him. He asked logistical questions about the training dates and the mentor assignment. He did not admit or deny. That is not required at this stage. He had 2 business days to accept or appeal. Monica logged the meeting notes and sent the summary. The mentor assignment came together quickly. HR asked a senior vice president from client strategy to serve someone respected for direct talk that does not humiliate. He agreed and blocked time on his calendar for the observation sessions. The training vendor returned dates by evening. 2 Fridays. 3 hours each with a workbook and role practice that focuses on listening without interruption and naming contributions without grabbing credit. The 360 survey tool sat ready with questions that reward specificity over heat. At 6, I received a brief message from Maya. Plan delivered. Acknowledgement received. Log updated. I responded with the sentence I had been using like a handrail. Thank you for keeping to the process. Then I shut my laptop and watched the building lights come up against the early dark. In another life, I might have tried to fix family with conversation or apology, or a fight that leaves a room gasping. In this life I am building, I will let systems do what they are built to do, and I will trust the weight of repeated behavior to tell its own truth over time. I drove home without the radio. The quiet made a clean line from office to kitchen. I set my bag down, took the pearls from my ears, and placed them in their dish. I stood a minute with my hands flat on the counter, feeling the cool of the stone. Somewhere in the building I had left printers were probably spitting out confirmations and calendar invites were blooming on screens. Nothing loud. Just the steady work of people doing their jobs. I let that image be enough for the night and turned the lights low. Ethan texted early and asked to meet near the river. I chose the cafe with the tin roof and the long windows where the water slides by slowly enough to steady a person. I arrived first and took a small table by the glass. The barista set down black coffee and left me to look at the view. A tug moved against the current with the patience only heavy work understands. I watched it and let my breath match its pace. He came in with his jacket unbuttoned and the look of a man who had slept but not well. He thanked the server out of habit and went to his point without circling. He said it had all gone too far and for the sake of the family, he hoped I could put in a word with HR. I let him finish without interruption. Then I set my cup down and told him I had recused myself in writing that I would not ask for exceptions, make calls, or carry messages. That boundary was there to protect the company, and for once to protect us. He leaned back as if the chair might lend him a different answer, and asked what I had felt the night before as if feeling might be the lever that could move policy. I said the feeling was simple and not grand. It was not shameful over a title. It was an insult to the dignity of work. Kitchens are where the good parts of life are prepared and carried out to the table. The servers he had joked at were doing the exact work that kept his celebration intact. I will always resent a remark that tries to make useful hands small. He did not interrupt me. He looked at the river instead, which was progress of a sort. I told him I had no instructions to give about his job and reminded him again that anything related to his employment belonged to Monica and Maya and the process they were running. Then I spoke as his sister. I suggested he apologize privately to the hotel's catering team, not a speech, just a quiet correction delivered to the people he had wronged, and that if he wanted to keep his honor, he should complete every part of the training in good faith. Take the modules seriously. Do the role practice without mockery, listen in meetings without jumping in and give credit without reaching for it. If he did those things not for me but for himself and for the room he works in, then the story could begin to change. He rubbed a thumb along the edge of his cup and said he would think about it, that the plan felt like a lot for a single night. I told him the plan was not for a night. It was for a pattern. The company had chosen a corrective path because it still assumed his talent could be paired with respect. That was a gift, and it came with a bill to be paid in changed behavior. He went quiet after that and stayed quiet long enough to hear himself. He asked me whether I hated him for what he said. I told him no. I believe in conditional forgiveness because forgiveness without change is just permission. My condition was simple and not up for haggling. Accountability is an action. If he made the apology and did the work without dragging his feet, I would lay the matter to rest in the family part of my life. If he did not, we would keep our distance until he decided what sort of man he wanted to be in public. I did not raise my voice or soften the terms. He nodded like a person hearing a diagnosis he does not prefer but trusts. He thanked me for not broadcasting the family business. I told him I had no appetite for turning private grief into a public meal. The only people who needed our words were sitting at that table, and the only other people who needed his words were waiting in the hotel kitchen. He said he understood. I believed him at that moment, because there was nothing to gain from pretending otherwise in front of a sister who knows the shape of his face when he is bluffing. We drew the line again in plain language, so neither of us could pretend we had not heard it. Questions about the plan went to Monica, any dispute through the appeal, and any work text to me would be forwarded to HR and logged. For birthdays, for hospital visits, for holidays, we would be brother and sister. At the office, we would be two employees who understood the difference between home and payroll. He managed a small smile at that last part. It landed like a truce. We let the conversation wander into safer ground for a few minutes, so the air could smooth itself. He asked after Ruth. I told him she was fine and bossing the church ladies with her usual efficiency. We remembered our mother's peach cobbler and the way she tapped the pan to hear if the crust was done. The river kept moving while we passed those pieces back and forth. The server cleared our cups. Ethan paid. Before we stood, he said he would email HR and acknowledge the plan, and that he would ask Monica for the contact at the hotel so he could make amends. I told him that sounded right. I did not say I would follow up, and I did not intend to. That is the point of a system. You can let go of the rope a little. We stepped out to the sidewalk together, and the wind off the water lifted the edge of his jacket. He said he appreciated my steadiness, even when he did not welcome it. I said steadiness was free to anyone who practiced it. He nodded again, not as agreement or surrender, but as a man trying on a better habit to see if it fit. We walked in opposite directions along the river, and I called Natalie to say we had met and we were calm. She asked for details, and I told her only the parts she should hold. He would apologize. He would do the training. The rest belonged to the office. I hung up and watched the tug push past the bend. Heavy work moved with the current. It felt like an answer. On the way back to the car, I passed a bakery that had already folded chairs for the day. A man inside wiped the stainless counter in long, calm strokes. I thought about how much of life is made sturdier by people whose names do not enter speeches. I thought about the room below the ballroom and the hands that had carried plates so the music could keep time. That is the dignity I had tried to defend at the wedding and at the table today. Not my title, not my pride. The dignity of work done well, even when no one is clapping. At home, I set my keys in the bowl by the door and rinsed my cup. I wrote a line in my notebook so the day would sit where I could find it later. Met Ethan. Boundary held. Forgiveness offered with a condition. I closed the cover and let the quiet land. Some endings are not loud. Some endings are a brother choosing to send the right email, a sister choosing not to press for a report, and a river moving forward at its own sensible pace. We held the town hall in the big multi-purpose room that used to be a training center before the company outgrew its walls. The chairs were set in wide arc aisles, left generous for late arrivals and nerves. I arrived early and walked the perimeter, while facilities checked the microphones and the projector insisted on its own preferences. The room smelled faintly of dry erase and coffee. People collected in small knots, and then found seats the way a flock decides together to land. I kept to the side until it was time. Maya opened the hour with the kind of measured steadiness that belongs to her. She laid out why we were in that room on a weekday morning, not to hunt a villain, not to perform contrition, but to hold the mirror up to our daily habits. She took the air out of any suspense by naming our standard first. Respect is not a perk, it is the floor we stand on. Then she pointed to the ceiling for the day. The practical work of keeping the floor intact. It sets the tone without stirring heat. Monica stepped in next and did exactly what people needed. She walked everyone through the reporting channels in plain language, the hotline by phone, web, and text, the non-retaliation guarantee, the way a case number follows a report so no one is lost. She showed the screen where an employee can find those links without hunting, and she told the room what to expect after a report is filed. Timestamps, a response window, who reads the note first, and how confidentiality is protected. Legal had pre-cleared her slides, but it was her voice that made the procedure feel human. You could feel shoulders letting down as the process replaced the rumor. Patricia from Client Success took the front after Monica and told a short story that landed exactly where I hoped it would. A client had stayed through a rocky transition not because we dazzled them with something shiny, but because a mid-level team made them feel heard at every turn. She named the steps they took without making heroes of anyone. Weekly check-ins with a clear agenda. A recap that gave credit to the person who had done the work, not the loudest speaker in the room. A habit of closing the loop on small promises. She did not offer adjectives. She offered actions. The room wrote notes. Then came the part that matters most and lasts longest. 3 anonymous accounts read aloud by an HR facilitator with a calm cadence that kept the room inside the story instead of around it. The first described being cut off in meetings, the familiar experience of launching a point only to watch it get intercepted and rebranded. There was no vengeance in the retelling, only facts, a date, a room, the topic on the agenda. The moment a sentence was lifted from one mouth and placed in another. The second account told of credit removed from slides, a name quietly absent from the title page of a deck they had built. The third account shared what it feels like to have an accent turned into a punchline, the kind of small mockery that leaves a long mark. No names, no hints at departments, only behaviors put in the open so we could decide together not to tolerate them. Silence sat with us after those readings, the way a good teacher sits with a hard question. People looked down, looked up, shifted, and then stilled. I stepped forward when it was time and kept my remarks short. I said we were not perfect and would not pretend otherwise. I said what matters is not postures of virtue, but systems that correct us when we forget ourselves. I told them plainly that we would act in 3 ways and keep acting until the actions felt ordinary. I named the steps in a sequence that someone could write on a napkin. The first step was mandatory workshops. Not a webinar that runs while an email sneaks onto a screen, but sessions that require presence. We would run them in small groups with a facilitator who knows how to turn a conversation from polite to useful. We would practice interrupting interruptions, naming contributions, without grabbing credit and calling people back into the discussion, when a habit or a bias pushes them out. We would schedule the workshops in waves, and no one would be exempt because culture is not something seniority buys you out of. The second step was an updated code of conduct. Not just a new cover in a different font, but an update that puts everyday behaviors in everyday words. We would add examples that looked like the jobs we actually do, not the jobs in stock photos. We would write a short section on meeting etiquette that made respect enforceable by anyone in the room, from the intern at the end of the table to the partner at the head. We would post the code where employees live during the day on the intranet, on the screens in the conference rooms, while meetings spin up, and in the onboarding path, so new hires learn the music from the first note. The third step was a dashboard that linked customer churn to internal satisfaction metrics. We would track how our clients behave when our people feel heard and when they do not. Exit interviews on the client side do not sit in a separate vault from internal surveys. We would lay those lines on top of each other and look at where they meet. Leadership would review the dashboard each quarter and show the company what we learned. If we found correlations, we would change what we measure and what we reward. I said it plainly. Dignity inside the house shapes retention outside the house. We will treat that truth like the business fact it is. I closed by reminding the room that this hour was about principles, not people. If anyone had walked in hoping for names, they would leave disappointed. The good kind of disappointed. We were not going to feed a hunger for spectacle. We were going to feed a hunger for rooms where people can do their work without standing guard over their own worth. Then I stepped back. There is a time to lead from the front, and a time to let the room take the next step with its own legs. Questions came in on cards, and through the internal channel we had opened for the session. The first asked how enforcement would work when the offender is high-performing. Maya answered that performance does not buy amnesty, and the new code would make that clear. The second asked whether managers would be trained to interrupt disrespect in real time without turning meetings into scoldings. Monica described a simple phrase, a hand signal. We could adopt a reset that makes space without making a scene. The third asked whether the dashboard would sit in a file no one opens after launch. I promised it would sit on the leadership agenda every quarter, and that we would show the company what we saw, not in marketing polish, but in the kind of data that teaches. We ended with a small exercise. People wrote one practice they would start this week and one they would stop. Cards went into a box at the door, anonymous by design, with a line for the department, so we could tailor the workshops. No one was graded. The point was to move hands, not to perform. When the hour closed, the applause was modest and sincere, the kind of clapping you hear at a recital where the learning is the point. Afterward, I stood near the exit and watched faces leave in pairs and trios, the way people carry a conversation out into the hallway to see if it holds in the light. Someone from finance told Maya she liked the hand signal idea. A project manager from tech asked Monica how to adopt the meeting etiquette section in a scrum. Patricia gathered her slides and tucked them away like a good tool ready for its next use. I felt something settle in my ribs that felt like the first deep breath after a long plane ride. Back in my office, I opened the draft of the updated code and added a note about the section on accents. We would write a plain sentence that made the human cost visible without indulging in lecture. I reviewed the pilot agenda for the workshops and asked for one segment about credit on slides to include a before and after example. On my screen, the mock-up of the dashboard looked spare and clean. 2 lines, one for churn, one for satisfaction, and a shaded space where they overlap. I did not linger over it. I sent my edits and closed the laptop, softly letting the room hold its quiet for a beat, before the next task asked for my attention. 90 days passed the way workdays do when you count them by check-ins and calendars. On a Monday morning, the HR memo landed in my inbox with the same neat subject line they use for everything from benefit updates to policy changes. Monica wrote it plainly. The development plan had been completed. The 6-hour training was done with the follow-up module checked. The mentor sessions had been attended and logged. The 360 feedback came back with notes that were sober-specific and pointed toward better habits. The recommendation was continuity with caution. Ethan would remain off the 2 sensitive accounts for another 3 months while the new patterns held. Appeal rights were explained once more for the record. He had chosen not to appeal. I let the memo sit a full minute before I forwarded it to the legal archive, the way a person sits with a measured verdict so it can become real. I did not reply with commentary. I wrote the single sentence that matters in a house that runs on systems: received and filed. Then I closed the email and looked out at the parking lot as people found their spots. The day kept moving. That was the point. By noon, Monica stepped into my doorway with a second envelope. She said a letter had arrived at the hotel addressed to the catering manager and that a copy had been sent to HR per their request. It was an apology written in a steady hand. She summarized it as acknowledgement without spin. He had written that his words had landed on the people who had carried the weight of the night and that he was sorry for the harm. The manager had replied with a short note that the team accepted the apology and appreciated that it had come to the right place. I thanked Monica and watched her leave with the pace of a person who knows a process is still moving and does not require the boss to narrate it. Ruth called that evening to say a separate envelope had been left at her door. She described the paper the way older hands do when they think paper still means something, heavy, unadorned with his name small at the top. He had written to thank her for the way she steadies a room and to say he regretted letting pride speak first at the wedding. She told me she would tuck the note in her Bible and then teased that she had always expected his penmanship to improve. I could hear the smile when she said it, a lightness that had not been in her voice for a while. Later that night, my phone lit with a message from Ethan that was brief and faultless in the way a good apology has to be before it can be useful. He did not excuse, he did not dramatize, he did not ask for anything. He wrote that he understood the terms of the plan and that he would keep at the work. I did not write back anything more than acknowledgement. We are not a family that needs to crowd a moment worth keeping. The family dinner came at the end of that week in a room that smells of warm tomatoes and old wood. We chose the little place near the river because it lets ordinary conversation do the lifting. Ruth took her seat with the ease of a woman who has sat at more tables than any of us. Natalie arrived with a calm face that told me she had script and counterscript ready if the evening tilted. The mother of the bride joined us because she had asked for the chance to set down a small weight she had been carrying since the wedding. She spoke first while the water glasses were still beating on their coasters. She said she regretted pressuring me on the night of the ceremony, and that she had asked out of fear rather than wisdom. She said she understood now that asking a woman to be quiet for the sake of a photograph is not the same as keeping peace. I told her that I knew she had wanted the day to stay whole and that I took no joy in hard lessons. The servers brought out bread and the conversation moved to the safer ground of salads and a new grandchild in someone's office. When the plates had settled, Natalie set down her fork with the care she uses when something important is about to be placed on a table. She said that boundaries are not punishments, they are guardrails that keep a family intact. She said we had learned that the long way, and she did not want to unlearn it. She has the gift of saying a necessary sentence without lighting it on fire. People nodded. The room felt lighter by a degree. I told everyone where I stood and where I would stay. I said I accepted the apologies that had been offered and that in the company we all play by the same rules. That is not coldness. That is fairness. I said I would not make exceptions because exceptions eat the floor beneath everyone else. No one disagreed. No one asked for an adjustment. You can feel the shape a family takes when it chooses to stand with the person who was asked to hold the line and not with the person who tested it. Ethan thanked the mother of the bride for her words and thanked Ruth for the letter she had returned with a note of her own blessed candor scrawled at the bottom. He did not rehearse his training experience for us like a schoolchild reporting on a field trip. He said only that he had learned where his habits had scratched the paint on other people's work and that he was trying to do less of that. I heard a truth in his voice that had been missing at the edges for a while. Not a complete reconstruction, but the sound of a man who has started to put tools back where they belong. We finished the meal the way families often do when they have walked through a hard piece and come out into cleaner air. Coffee a shared dessert, the oldest joke told once, because it is tradition then jackets and hugs in a loose circle near the door. Outside the night had that honest chill that makes you remember your coat. I stood with Natalie while people sorted rides and leftovers. She squeezed my hand and said we were inching toward better. I agreed. It is how most good things arrive. At home, I placed the receipts in a drawer and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the overhead light. The house hummed its everyday music. The company would keep its watch on the dashboard we had promised. Ethan would stay off the big accounts a little longer while new habits found a permanent home. Ruth would keep her notes in their safe place. The mother of the bride would look at her photographs and remember that day. I breathed and let the quiet redraw the outline of the month we had lived, consequence without spectacle, growth without a parade. 3 months moved through the building with the pace of ordinary work. Cross-mentoring launched on a Tuesday with a list of pairs taped to the intranet and a handful of people surprised to find themselves matched with someone from another floor. Coffee rooms turned into small classrooms. I watched a young analyst walk a senior director through a dashboard she had simplified, and I watched the director write a thank you note that sounded like respect rather than favor. The company felt a degree steadier, not loud, just aligned. Internal satisfaction ticked upward on the survey that matters, because it asks about daily conditions and not poster ideals. The dashboard on my screen laid 2 clean lines, one for how our people felt, one for how our clients stayed, and you could see the space between them narrow. A client who had paused a renewal came back with a fresh contract and a comment that told me we had picked the right fight. They said the tone of the team felt clearer and kinder, and that work is easier to buy when it does not make you brace. On a Thursday morning, I stepped out of a conference room and met Ethan at the turn near the elevators. He offered a courteous nod, and I returned it the simple grammar of 2 professionals who share a roof and choose their sentences. In meetings, I heard his voice less often and more precisely. He waited out a pause so another person could finish a thought. He closed a recap with a sentence that gave credit to the person who had built the model instead of the person who had sold it. Small moves repeated enough to tell the truth about intent. He remained off the 2 major accounts and would for another quarter, and that was a proper boundary. Not a punishment. He did not test it. Ruth texted a photograph of my mother's pearls laid in the dish on a lace cloth. She wrote that our mother would be proud of the way we had chosen order when noise would have been easier in the moment. I wrote back my thanks and told her I was trying to hold the line in a way that made space for everyone else to stand a little taller. She sent back a blessing in the shorthand of a woman who has blessed a lot of mornings. The mentoring pairs kept meeting. In one session, I sat in the back while a mentor asked a simple question that shifted a room. What will make this easier for the person who has the least power here? People adjusted their notes. It is a fine thing to watch decency become practical. The updated code went live with plain language and examples that looked like our work. Meeting rooms ran the short etiquette slide before every agenda. Respect stopped being a speech and started being a practice. Late one afternoon, I stood by the long window and watched Ashford turn its lights on. The skyline is not grand, but it is ours, and from that height you can see the hotel that held a wedding, a pause in a song, and a door that opened to a second room. I thought about that walk from one floor to the next, about how revenge can ask for spectacle, and how integrity asks for something quieter that lasts longer. I did not strike back that night. I set a bar and stood still long enough for the room to adjust to it. The best part of the last 3 months is how many people brought their own hands to hold it in place. Ethan passed me in the hall and gave another nod that was almost a smile. We did not hug. Our eyes did not brace for impact. We had the truce that comes from choosing to do the work in front of you and letting the rest be handled by structures that do not sleep. Ruth's message sat warm in my pocket. Natalie sent a note about a church bake sale and teased that she would not attempt the peach cobbler because our mother's standard still stands too high. I laughed out loud alone in my office and let it be a sign that the heaviness had thinned. I walked the perimeter of the floor before heading out, a habit I keep when a day needs a full stop. People waved without breaking concentration. The printer hummed. Someone set a fresh pot of coffee for the early risers the next day. In the lobby, I paused at the glass and looked at my reflection, not to admire it, but to recognize it. A woman who carried her work well into a hard room and let the work speak. A woman who understood that calm is not a performance, it is a decision you make and keep. If this finds you, and you have been told to stay in the kitchen, remember that kitchens are where the good parts of life are prepared and carried out to the table. Rooms can fall quiet when you enter carrying your work with care. You do not need a microphone to make your point. You need your name, your standards, and the steady courage to walk into the next room when the first one tries to shrink you. If any of this reached you, I would like to hear when you were underestimated and how you rewrote your ending. Tell me your story. The next one we need might be the one you have been waiting to tell.